In 1985, at 30 years old, you are fired from the company you started in your parents' garage. Your name is on the building, your face is on the cover of magazines, and the board just voted you out of your own office. You walk out that day believing your life is over. What you don't know yet is that losing this job is the best financial decision you never made. That sentence sounds wrong. It should sound wrong. Losing an income, a title, a routine, a sense of who you are at parties when someone asks what you do. That isn't supposed to be the setup for wealth. It's supposed to be the setup for disaster. But something strange shows up when you look closely at the people who lost everything and ended up with more. The job loss wasn't the accident. It was the ingredient. Here's the part almost nobody tells you. The fear you feel right now, thinking about losing your job, is not really a fear about money. Daniel Kahneman spent decades proving that humans feel the pain of a loss roughly twice as intensely as the pleasure of an equivalent gain. That's not a guess. That's measured, replicated behavior. So when you imagine losing your paycheck, your brain doesn't calculate the risk fairly. It floods you with a warning signal calibrated for a threat far bigger than what's actually in front of you. That fear keeps you still. And staying still is expensive in a way your bank statement never shows you. Think about the last time you almost quit something. A job, a habit, a relationship that had already ended in every way except paperwork. You stayed longer than you should have. Almost everyone does. There's a name for part of why. Richard Thaler's research on mental accounting shows people treat money and effort already invested as a reason to keep going, even when the smartest financial move is to walk away. Economists call the trap the sunk cost fallacy. Your gut calls it loyalty or stability or just being responsible. It's neither. It's a bias with a name, and it's been quietly running your decisions since before you knew it existed. But that's not even the strange part. Back to 1985. Steve Jobs doesn't disappear after Apple pushes him out. He starts a new computer company called Next, and it struggles. Then, almost as an afterthought, he buys a small computer graphics division from Lucasfilm for $10 million. He renames it Pixar. For years, Pixar loses money. Jobs later says he almost sold it more than once. He keeps it instead, mostly out of stubbornness. In 1995, Pixar releases Toy Story. In 2006, Disney buys Pixar for $7.4 billion in stock, and Steve Jobs, the man fired from his own company 11 years earlier, becomes Disney's single largest individual shareholder. He didn't get richer because he lost his job. Losing his job removed the one thing that was keeping him from Pixar in the first place: certainty. As long as Jobs had Apple, Apple was the only bet he needed to make. The firing didn't hand him a fortune. It removed the ceiling on his attention. You've probably done this exact thing this week without noticing it. Not the billion-dollar version, the small one. You had a spare hour and spent it scrolling instead of starting the thing you keep saying you'll get to once things settle down. Things rarely settle down on their own. Sometimes they have to be taken away from you first. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. There's a body of research from labor economists studying what's called necessity entrepreneurship. People who start businesses not because they had a brilliant idea sitting ready, but because the job that was supposed to arrive never did. Some of these ventures fail. Plenty of them do. But a meaningful share of small business founders report the same origin story: a layoff, a firing, a company that closed, and no other option left standing. The businesses that came out of forced starts weren't necessarily better ideas than the ones people talked about for years and never launched. They were simply the ones that got launched because the alternative, waiting for permission from a paycheck, had been taken off the table. That's the twist hiding inside the fear. A steady job doesn't just pay you. It also quietly gives you permission to postpone. And postponing, compounded over years, is its own kind of cost. One that never shows up on a pay stub because it isn't a number. It's a version of your life that never got built. You don't need to lose a job to understand this. You just need to notice what a steady paycheck has been letting you avoid. Robert Shiller, the economist who studies how stories shape markets more than spreadsheets do, has a phrase for the tales people tell themselves that quietly steer real financial decisions. He calls them narrative economics, and the most common financial narrative in most households isn't about stocks or savings rates. It's simpler than that. It's the story that says, as long as the job is still here, everything is fine. That story feels true because your bills get paid. But it hides the second question underneath it. What would you actually be doing with your time and your effort if that job disappeared tomorrow? For most people, the honest answer reveals something. Either you'd rebuild towards something you actually want, or you'd panic because you never built anything alongside it at all. Here's a number worth sitting with. Studies tracking household savings behavior have repeatedly found that a majority of adults would struggle to cover an unexpected expense of even a few $100s without borrowing. That's not a story about laziness. It's a story about a system that rewards spending the moment income arrives and quietly punishes anyone who tries to build a second option alongside the first. Milton Friedman called this the permanent income hypothesis. People tend to adjust their spending to match what they expect to keep earning, not what they're currently earning. Which means the more secure a job feels, the more a lifestyle quietly expands to meet it. Security and fragility end up wearing the same outfit. There were 3 warning signs economists have identified in people who struggle the most after a sudden job loss, and you've probably missed at least one of them in your own life already. The first is a single source of income with no second stream, however small, sitting beside it. The second is a lifestyle sized exactly to match the paycheck, with no gap between what comes in and what goes out. The third, and the quietest one, is an identity that's fused entirely to a job title, so that losing the role doesn't just cost money, it costs the sense of who you are. Steve Jobs never had that third problem, which is part of why the firing didn't break him. He'd already built an identity as someone who made things, not as an Apple executive. When Apple was gone, the identity wasn't. This is the part most people get wrong about the ones who got lucky after a layoff. It wasn't luck. It was that they had already been building something small and unofficial on the side, long before the loss forced it into the center of their life. The job loss didn't create the opportunity. It just stopped protecting them from having to notice it was already there. So here's the closing loop, the one still sitting unanswered since the start of this. Why does losing something you depended on sometimes make people richer when it should, by every intuitive measure, make them poorer? Because the paycheck was never the actual source of security. It only felt that way. The real source was always the second option quietly waiting underneath it. The skill, the side project, the identity that didn't depend on a single company's approval. Losing the job doesn't build that option. It just finally makes you look at it. In 1985, the board of Apple thought they were taking something away from Steve Jobs. What they actually did was remove the only thing standing between him and Pixar. You don't need a board to fire you to ask the same question they accidentally asked him. What is the version of your financial life you keep postponing because the current one still, technically, works? The paycheck was never the safety net. It was just the reason you never noticed you didn't have one.